Have you felt the ground shift beneath your feet as the whole of our industry collapses? Are we witnessing the gold standard of collaboration, the diamond stud of customer centricity, the silver bullet of product development come to the end of its era? Everywhere you look, change initiatives are coming to a close. Agile coaches and Scrum Masters are finding it hard, if not impossible, to keep and sustain work. Executives have gone from considering Agile veneration to being shunned. So, if you haven't heard it already for the last few days, people are asking, is Agile dead? Now, we're here to tell you today that the death of capital A Agile is perhaps not a moment of concern, but an opportunity for growth. Because we believe that true agility and its principles are actually timeless.
Timeless, in fact, because the solution we've been throwing at you for the last 20 years, we believe, are much older than that. Much older than the last couple decades and the decades before that. We believe that most of the story we share today can be rooted in ancient history. And that's a technique we use with our teams. So when we come to our teams, we don't talk to them about lean, agile things. We talk to them about defeating armies, inventing new social systems, or changing the fate of mythical heroes. And that's our value proposition for you today, to leverage the power of storytelling and proved concept far before our era to drive change in our organization. I'm Aurelien. I'm often referred to as a productivity nerd.
And I'm Ferzeen. I'm often called an efficiency queen. Together we represent Magic Agile, a consultancy based in Australia. We help teams across Oceania, Asia and Pacific with one objective in mind, to continuously inspire people to learn, grow and try new things.
You will believe that for you to be in this room today, you must be a bit of an idealistic bunch. And so are we. So we aim to provide you with some hope, but so practical means to reset conversation in the workplace.
You see, the stories we've heard time and time again are inherently contained stories of high performance back in the ancient times, right? And they all contain simple, pragmatic lessons of taking one step at a time to achieve high performance, enabling individuals, teams, and even whole armies. Unfortunately, these lessons seem to not be seeing the success we expected in modern-day society. But the truth is, the challenges that plagued ancient civilizations plague modern workplaces today, so the solutions actually remain the same.
Yes, to illustrate that, we like to put the teams we work with into boxes. More specifically, we map them on what we call a team context landscape. When we start working with a team, we ask ourselves, where do they fit on this landscape? Top left, one of the extreme, maybe they are service teams, BAU teams. Talking here about maybe operations teams, maybe call centers, or basically any team that will use a ticket system to drive their work, right? Key issue for them, infinite backlog. Requests keep on coming. On the other side of the spectrum, one of the other extreme, product teams, right? They are working on something that's new, emerging, highly complex most of the time. And one of their key problems is need for certainty. Stakeholder asking, by when will I have these things? Right here you also have project teams, startups, anybody really driven by a roadmap. And we believe that's extremes, and no team actually fit in either definition. Often you are floating somewhere in the middle, right? You've got that roadmap, also have to deal with BAU, answer requests as they come. So today we'll call that hybrid teams. Biggest problem for them, constant disruption, because there is a plan, but there is also a lot of change, and we have to deal with this. For those, we'll share 3 metaphors from ancient Greece that we use to try and spark change, re-spark curiosity, and restart the conversation away from Agile and closer to let's get shit done. Sorry, from Australia. Let's start with the service teams.
So for the service teams, we like to use the metaphor of the Spartans, in particular, when they battled Xerxes' infinite army back in 480 BC. Now, for those of us who are not history buffs, if you watch the movie 300, it does a pretty good job of depicting this story. Now, in particular, why we like the metaphor of the Spartans for service teams is because of how the Spartans were structured and also of their incredibly effective military tactic, the phalanx, which is this sort of row of shields that you see here that is almost impenetrable and behind which the Spartans stood and fight. But for this tactic to be successful, the Spartans had to work in a particular way. Every individual was able to work at any part of this structure. They had very similar skills, and they could follow established processes and repeated actions. Right? If needed, they could take over a different part of the phalanx. Right? They always, wherever they were, did the part of the process they needed to do to get the job done. In fact, if we visualize the battle process of the Spartans, it probably looked a little bit like this. So if you read the board from the left to right, we have waves of enemies approaching from the field. You have the next wave upcoming, and we are, of course, talking about the Spartans here. So if your enemy reached the phalanx, they just got done. If we're lucky, and we're looking at a good service team, established good flow, their process probably looks a little bit like this, right? Now, unfortunately for the Spartans, they once faced an incredible challenge that happens to our service teams as well, which in 480 BC, in the second invasion of Greece, the Persian emperor Xerxes raised the largest army known at that point in time. And compared to the small group of Spartans, this was essentially an infinite army. Leonidas, who was leading the Spartans, decided that he was going to put up 7,000 people against this infinite army and hold them off while the rest of Greece could assemble. Now, this seems a little bit like a harebrained idea when you think about the fact that the only weakness of the phalanx is that it cannot afford to get outflanked. If it gets outflanked, it will get overwhelmed. So, with an infinite army and 7,000 Spartans, how is this going to work? Well, Leonidas actually had a plan behind the plan, which is to use terrain as a force multiplier. Leonidas took the battle to Thermopylae, or the Hot Gates, which was a narrow corridor on the pathway of the Persians, and this essentially ensured that the Persians had to line up behind themselves, which meant fewer numbers could get through and meet the Spartans. Leonidas essentially created a pull system by limiting WIP, or work in progress, for his team. And this was a very effective battle strategy. If you visualize the battle, this is what happened. Because despite the fact that the Persian army was very, very large compared to the Spartans, by limiting the numbers of the Persian army that they had to face at the phalanx, they could sustain this for a really long time. And they did. For 3 whole days, the Spartans held. The Persians submitted incredible casualties and losses. The Spartans were in a pretty good state. And it's actually believed that they could have held this indefinitely, potentially even overwhelming and beating the Persian army. But if you've seen the movie, or if you've read the books, that's not quite how it went down. Unfortunately for the Spartans, the Persians discovered a narrow goat path that allowed them to circumvent the Spartans and come up on them from behind. On this end, they were outflanked and they were overwhelmed. They did not stand a chance. This, to me, sounds a little bit scarily like what happens to service teams often, a little thing called expedites. So what can we actually learn from the Spartans and from Leonidas? What's interesting to me to think about is that when faced with essentially overwhelming challenge, Leonidas didn't start an initiative called New Ways of Fighting. Instead, he realized that what he had to leverage was the system, the process, rather than try to change the people. Change the system, not the people. And so for service teams, you want to mind this. You want to establish and manage your flow, and at no cost can you let your flow be disrupted. So that's our story for service teams and the Spartans. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum.
So if you don't have an infinite army, then you have to deal with a lot of complexity, uncertainty, all the VUCA word, right? For our product teams, we like to find inspiration in what the Athenians did 600 years before Christ. They were inventing democracy, right? A very new social system, never seen before, something that's emerging, very complex. We're trying things, we don't know how it works, and we're kind of inventing it as we go, really like service team. Moreover, when they were gathering at the assembly, it was a bit like a cross-functional team, right? Experts trying to fairly represent the people, getting together and trying to get job done, right? So you know how it works. You get a motion that's going to be discussed there, and rather it's going to be integrated in the system or not. A bit like development team. Actually, we like to map this process like that. I like to say, when you came to the assembly, you had a kind of a backlog. The next motion we'd like to see discussed, right? From that, the assembly will pick one and get together. And they will swap orators, one after the other. They will make points, enter debate, contradict each other, trying to make points, right? And when all the points been made, the assembly will cast a vote, right? Rather, we'll adopt or not the motion. And we repeat that process. Interesting to note that any of the motion could be about changing that process itself. Who was to be represented at the assembly or whatever. Okay, so that reminds us of some iterative process applied into some complex emerging systems, right, that you may have seen team do. Now, the Greeks had the exact same problem than our product team today, right? It's when you have the stakeholder entering the room and say, how can I be sure that we'll have discussed that by winter? How can I be sure that next week these three things will be done? And the Greeks had to invent more things than just democracy. They invented the art of rhetoric. How does it work? It's to say, rather than us having a debate about, I rationally think that it's going to be done or not, and try to convince each other through logic, they said, let's use factual things. Let's look at shared experience, things that have happened in real life, learn from it, and try to forecast. It's actually quite of a simple circle they had at the time, right? Get something done, visualize your progress, and prioritize what's next, and start that again. So if we want to use modern visualization, you know, that's really how you can use that with your teams. You say, right, for the last 3 sprints, this is what has been done. This is our common experience. What trends can we hope to see? So if your stakeholders arrive and say, will that have been discussed by winter? You can say, well, it seems like by winter, we should be able to do, at worst, all of that. And at best, all of that. Do we need to discuss your motion tomorrow? And the guy may say, no, all right, no, those are more important. Let's come back to it in a few months. Et voila. Now, obviously, the Greeks had faced the same reality than our teams today, which means that this was happening all the time. You know, you rarely fly over your estimates, right? You sometimes have to catch up. Now, the problem is that we are dealing with complexity, which is exactly like trying to open a barrel full of monkey and predict how long it's going to take you to catch them. Right? Sometimes 3 weeks, sometimes a few hours. But even how many monkeys are in the barrel, you don't know until you have it open. Right? So the Greeks were simply readapt, right? And do what we call replanning and saying, well, if now winter is in a few weeks, and this is what we could potentially achieve, do you think we need to discuss that motion next? Right? So 2 lessons we like to teach with this story to our product team. First, Agile was never about promising you twice the value in half the time. I don't know who said that. It was really about expecting the art of the possible. The flow of traditional management system was that you were trying to focus and promise things that we had no idea will actually happen or not. So it's always been about, if you give me a team in 6 months, what I can promise you is you will get the best you can get out of that team in 6 months. Right? And let us make sure that this happens. Lesson number 1, an agile perspective. Number 2, all those things we are doing, right? Radiation system, visualization, using data, all the conversation, that should only be informing one thing. What should come next? What should we be working on next sprint, next iteration? It's never about trying to forecast what will be done by next year, right? It's to inform us what to do right now. Couple lessons we use with our product teams. Which leaves us to every other teams, right?
Yeah, because in my experience, very rarely are teams pure product teams. They tend to be in this hybrid team situation where they have a little bit of BAU going on, a little bit of their roadmap as well situation. And the metaphor we like to use for hybrid teams is that of the Trojans and, of course, the very famous war that they're associated with. So if we think about the work that hybrid teams are doing, we think about what happened to Troy when their prince married the wrong girl, or brought back home the wrong girl, right? So Troy was actually a very prosperous city. Paris, the prince of Troy, brought back Penelope, the wife of the Spartan king, back to Troy. And the Spartan king's brother Agamemnon was then the current ruler of all of Greece, which meant he effectively brought the whole of Greece to the doors of Troy. Now, the Trojans were actually very resilient people, right? And they were very confident they could withstand this siege. They had very thick walls, strong doors. They were pretty confident. Priam, the king of Troy, was a little less confident given the fact that there was a lot of pressure, attacks were coming from all angles, and they were pretty sure that they were going to run out of food at some point. A little bit like these looming deadlines that hybrid teams are also dealing with. So if we visualize sort of the situation for hybrid teams, it looks a little bit like this wall over here, right? So you've got your wonderful expedite items, despite the fact that there are clear milestones established and changing priorities. You seem to also have a lot of stuff going on in progress and a lot of stuff coming. And if you think about the Spartans and the Athenians that we've been talking about so far, it really feels like the hybrid teams are really dealing with the worst of all worlds, right? So we've got the issue of changing priorities, like the Spartans getting overwhelmed because their flow got disrupted. We've got release milestones looming, like the Senate having to commit to a decree. You've got the infinite backlog of requests. You've got, and of course, you've also got unpredictability in the work, like a barrel of monkeys. You never really know what we're going to be doing and when. So when I walk into a team room and I look at a wall that looks a little bit like this, I have a tiny bit of a panic attack because I then think about what happened to the Trojans.
You all see that coming, right? We know what happened to the Trojan. And if you don't, they were obviously dealing with all the pressure in the world, and at some point the Greek grew tired of the war. The war lasted, we think the war lasted at least 10 years, right? 10 years of besieging Troy. At some point the Greeks are thinking, we're done with this, right? We need to find a solution, and they find one, the Trojan horse. Right? You all know about the Trojan horse. They pretend to leave, right? They get the boat off the beach they were settling in, and leave behind a magnificent Trojan horse made of wood. On that morning, when the Trojans come to fight with the Greeks, they find the beach empty, and that left beyond. We won, they thought. It's done, it's over. 10 years of war, done and over, right? And the horse, that were they thought maybe it's like for the goats to be good to the Greeks so they can make it home, is also a symbol for Troy. Well, how marvelous, let's bring it in, right? So they obviously had a backlog of work, of ongoing things, right? 10 years of war, you have to attend the injured, you have to attend the dead. Winter is coming, so you may need to restart farming. Like, there is a lot to do. But what they say instead is like, let's do this instead. 3 days of party, let's celebrate victory around the horse, bring it in and do that. So disrupt the flow, change the priority, bring the horse in, party, get completely drunk, and then go to bed. What they don't know is that inside the horse, there are Greek soldiers hidden. And once everybody is in bed, they get out and open the door to the whole of the Greek army that was only hidden a few miles away. Right? Troy is sacked and burnt overnight. 10 years of hard work, maintaining the situation, all blown away overnight. Right? And that's really what happened to the team. So I see my hybrid team, they're working with all the pressure in the world, and then the stakeholder comes in the morning and say, we need this now. You know that thing, can you do just this tiny thing for me? Can you do that today, if you may? Can we add it to the backlog? Hey, you know that release for March? I'm thinking we should add this in there. Right, so let's see these Trojan horses get into our flow. Sometimes it's okay. Actually, it's just a minor thing. We get it done. Everything is fine. But often, inside the horses, are the Greeks hidden? This production issue that's going to happen for these minute, tiny things that you were asked of. Break the production, 2 days disruption. All right, that's going to start taking over your work in progress. This thing that was supposed to be simple, but you need to rely on this other team, that has no availability for the next 6 months. That clearly takes over your sprint. Right? And all those other complications, this thing that was supposed to be very simple, but we're dealing with a legacy system here. The whole roadmap's blown. Right? So we see our hybrid teams, they are obviously living into a very high-pressured environment, and we try to remind them of that. If human resilience is the only thing that makes it stand, it will one day find its limit. And you draw resilience as you draw from a pool, but you have no idea how much water is left. And one day it snaps. Maybe your senior engineer will leave because he's got a very great offer to work on a very exciting product, and he's gone. How do you deal with that? Maybe the production and the system was pushed to its limit, and it's going to collapse. Right? So be really careful of this lesson learned. We've seen that many times. And other things. In Agile, we really want to take in more work, change priorities. We want to be able to adapt, right? However, the problem we have is that people do this, but do not consider it a strategic pivot. Right? You say yes to something, that means we have to say no to something else. And this is the only reason it's going to be working. If you just keep on saying yes, well, let's do that and that and that on top of the rest, then we are in trouble. Right? So adapt the plans.
We really think Agile is ancient history. Simple, pragmatic lessons that have been handed down to us for centuries that we can take into the workplaces today. When dealing with incredible challenges, establish and manage your flow and don't let it get disrupted. When dealing with uncertainty, instead of predictability, focus on deciding what's the most important to do next and expect the art of possible. And instead of bleeding human beings dry, understand that resilience will find its limits. We are resilient people, but it's better to work sustainably. And it's okay to welcome change, as long as it's a strategic pivot.
So today we use 3 ancient history narratives to help you respark this curiosity at work. We believe that Lean Agile, as a big capital A Agile word, may be fading out. Right? But you have this opportunity to respark curiosity and conversation. Use these narratives, make your own. There is so many stories we have available. Because it's never been about Agile anyway. It's always been about uncovering better ways, one step at a time. Thank you.
Thank you.